Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and give people a chance to come into the room. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here.
Just turning on my video.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Well, it's good that we got everything situated on the, not sure what was going on there. So
yeah, very good. All right, guys. I want to be conscious of your time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. It ought to be a great session. Please go ahead and share your information via chat. We want you to get to know each other. Once a month, we have a networking session, and this month it's going to be on July 30th, and that's your chance to really get to know everybody in person. We have it do it in webinar format so that we can record the video. A lot of folks watch it after the fact. So I'm very delighted to have Chris Sawchuk here with us today. Thank you, Chris.
absolutely.
All right, so let's see here. I just want to tell you about Purse Power quickly, and then we'll get into the session. Purse Power is working to help women use their massive purchasing power to drive positive change. We believe that if women who make 80% of all purchasing decisions would choose to buy from the companies that actively promote women, and we would do that in mass, and if we could create a funding stream for battered women's shelters in the process, that we could shatter glass ceilings and change lives. So that's what we're trying to do at Purse Power. And we started these sessions when the pandemic began as a way of connecting people with each other, sharing national leaders with you, just really helping you through this time. And I just want to give a shout out to any of our shareholders that are online. Thank you for being here. And we'll go ahead and get started. So again, please introduce yourselves. We'll have a Q&A a little later in the broadcast. Please do go ahead and put your questions in as you have them. And then we'll give Chris a chance to answer them a little later on. Chris is the principal and the global practice leader and advisory leadership team member with the Hackett Group. And I've known about the Hackett Group for years. They're a great research organization. And he works with the intellectual property-based strategic consultancy, and they consult with global companies. He's got 20 years of experience with industries of Fortune 500 companies and mid-sized companies across all kinds of industries. And he's worked with them on strategy, organizational change, as well as process design and digital technology enablement, which is, of course, is a huge deal nowadays. Chris is a globally recognized leader, and he's won a number of awards on his topic of supply management, including strategic sourcing and risk management. He's going to be sharing his insights on the move towards greater supply chain diversity with us. I saw him on another webinar and said, hey, we need that because we need our women participants to get more business with these large companies. So to begin, Chris, we always want to know about you. Who are you? How'd you get to this point in your life and career?
Yeah, well, it's always interesting when people ask that question. And, I always think to say there's not been any grand plan to end up where I am today. I came out of school and, I was an electrical engineer. So I was, focused on designing computers and, work with United Technologies and IBM. And, after doing that for a period of time, I actually decided I wanted to go on the, basically make a complete pivot in my career. I had been working on my MBA because I graduated with a double E, and I went to the business side of things and did a complete reversal into sales and marketing, which was completely, set aside from, the electrical engineering work that I was doing. And when I was doing that, I had an opportunity because I was doing that with IBM. And one of the executives from IBM had left, and he went to a consulting firm. And, he asked me, he said, would you be interested in coming and working with us? And I really looked at it as an opportunity to sort of blend some of the analytical skills that I had, that I developed during my engineering days. At the same time, having that ability and opportunity to work with clients, to work with customers, et cetera. And so that's how I got into it. So, you ask about, supply management, where I focus today. That was what I got into when I went into management consulting. They put me on projects that focused on strategic sourcing, supply management, et cetera. So as I mentioned, it wasn't any grand plan. I just sort of ended up here based on, I'll say, a significant opportunity. I always look, procurement at that period of time was one of those things where, we were trying to go into CFOs, and this is many years ago, trying to convince them that, actually saving money and doing some of this stuff was actually a good thing. And, today there's no convincing that has to be done. And, this field, and especially with the pandemic, We all know how much exposure and visibility the supply chain has gotten. I actually have my kids actually know what I do for a living now versus before. My dad does supply chain. I had no idea what that was. But there's also the whole focus of this conversation today, and that's on supply-based diversity. And one of the things I'd like to say is that this is something that we've been looking at, and we've been studying this space since 2005. And what was interesting at the time, we didn't go into it with a plan to go focus on diversity. It was always something that we benchmark as an organization. But we would have organizations that would come to us and make comments, leaders of procurement, et cetera, that would make comments and say, if we diversify our supply base, to a higher degree, it could have an impact on the metric that most of these procurement leaders get measured on most significantly. And that's their ability to save money and deliver, cost savings to their organizations. And, we didn't know the answer to that. But what we did know is that in our benchmark, we were collecting information about the level of diversification in the supply bases of many, many different companies. At the same time, we were collecting information around the performance of these procurement organizations. Organizations that were world-class performers, meaning they saved more money than others, they were much more efficient, they were delivering more value, and others that were not world-class. This is what we did is we compared those two populations. We said, let's look at the world-class, high-performing procurement organizations versus those that were not necessarily high-performing and not world-class. And what we did is we found at that point, that the level of diversification in the supply bases of those two organizations was roughly the same. And so in some ways, it was debunked the kind of comments we were receiving that, driving a higher level of diversification in their supply base wasn't having any kind of impact on their ability to deliver other types of value to the organization. Well, as a result of that, we wrote a research paper on it. It was covered by the Wall Street Journal back at that time. And then shortly after that, we were getting phone calls to be one of the plenary speakers at the National Minority Supplier Development Council, as well as other, diverse, organizations. And so that's really how we got started in the space. And then since that time, we've been, looking at at this space on an annual basis. At least in the beginning. What we started to do is, we were doing a regular study of this, what suppliers or these customers are doing in terms of diversifying their supply bases. And, what was happening is we didn't see a lot of change occurring. And when you don't see a lot of change occurring, you start increasing the length of time between the studies that you do. And so we were doing studies on a 2 to 3 year frequency, I would say over the last 10 years. And that all changed. Our last study that we did was in 2019. And in 2019, we took a look at, what was happening in the whole world of supply-based, supplier diversity and supply-based diversification. And then with all of the events of last year, the next time we were supposed to look at that was in, 2022. And what we did is we accelerated that. And we actually launched our study, significantly, in advance of what we were supposed to do because of what happened last year. And so, some of the things that Don and I will be talking about today are some of the insights from the study that we just completed, back in April.
Perfect. I'm back.
Well, Don, I just went on and started continuing to talk. So
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. So were you talking about how these initiatives have increased during this time of the pandemic, particularly with related to diversity and what you're seeing, how women businesses fit in?
Well, what we ended up doing is really just after introducing myself, I just went into, how Hackett really got involved in supply-based diversification research. Mm-hmm. And so I gave the story about, how we got started in this back in 2005. And it was really to debunk I'll say a question or debate that was occurring in terms of the fact that some organizations were making the comments that diversification was leading them to be able to deliver the same level of value that they could be if they didn't have to diversify their supply base. And so we just went into our database and found out that that wasn't true. effectively world-class organizations and non-world-class organizations were delivering, similar levels of diversification, even though the world-class organizations were performing to a significantly higher degree than the non-world-class organizations. And again, that sort of led us to the ongoing research that led us to being, written about in the Wall Street Journal, et cetera. So that was really how everything got started in our efforts in this space.
Perfect. I mean, your timing was amazing. Your timing was amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
it's become more and more important. All right. So, okay, I'm particularly interested, as is our audience, in diversity initiatives around women in business, obviously.
mm-hmm.
What are the buyer's highest priorities, and how do buying from women-owned businesses fit in? How does it fit in?
Yeah, so just when you think about women and, how that all fits in, I think, what we see in the environment today, and, most of us see this, is that, last year we saw, I'll say, an elevation of the social conscious of not only the population of our country, but, our businesses as well. And a lot of it around diversification. Now, there's other things that we're concerned about as a broader social conscious in terms of the environment and corporate social responsibility, et cetera. But the focus on diversification, not only within our employee bases, within our companies, but also within the supply bases. And that's really been a lot of wind at our backs in terms of really driving forward with some of the initiatives that companies, potentially had started, but they were difficult. It was, I would say in a lot of companies, these initiatives were being driven by procurement people, potentially lower level in the organization, and it was being pushed uphill. What we're seeing is a complete pivot where organizations are now being driven based on the executive committee as well as the board level in those organizations that are driving this. They're seeing what the market wants, and they're driving this kind of behavior within organizations. So these programs have never had the significance of the support that they have today, in our environment.
That's really, really good news. That's really good news. All right. Well, I mean, given, everything that's going on, use your crystal ball and tell us what kinds of opportunities you see on the horizon, given all of this.
Yeah. I continue to see this as a growing focus. And, one of the questions that we asked here in our study was, not only where we are today in terms of the level of diversification within our supply bases, but where organizations were projecting, where they think they're going to be or where their objectives or goals are as they looked out. And what we were looking at is a time frame from 2021 out to 2025. And I'll give you some numbers here. So when you look at today, the median organization was around, if you look at their supply base, about 5.2% of their supply base was what they would call diversified. Now that's women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, and there's about 10 or a dozen categories that we looked at and asked about that are all included in this diversification, and so that's where we are today. Now, if you looked at some of the top performers there, because we looked at the data and we said, all right, you have your top quartile, bottom quartile, and sort of the median, so the middle of the organization. This particular study, we surveyed over 100 large corporate, most of them global multinational companies that we would all recognize very, very well. And there was a contingent when you looked at the top performers there that you're looking at percentages of diversification that were in a 7.5% today. So as you look forward, one of the things we asked is, how are your objectives changing over the next several years? So when you look at that median organization, what they came back to us is by the end of 2021, so we're looking at 6 months from now, they're expecting that their diversification will be at 8% of their overall spend is with diverse suppliers. When they started looking out over the next, to 2024, 2025, that increasing to 13%. Now, those top performers are highlighting numbers like 20%. And what's interesting about this is what we're seeing unfolding, right? So these numbers are going up significantly compared to where we are today. And this is also in I'll say in an environment where our economy is growing at a very a quick rate right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you're looking at a massive influx of opportunity for diverse businesses, and especially women-owned businesses, which is the largest contingent of the diverse businesses that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so my belief is that this kind of environment and this kind of demand that's coming into all of this diverse spend, diverse suppliers, specifically a lot of the women-owned businesses, is that it's going to create constraints. The question is, do we have enough capacity to meet the oncoming demand over the next 3, 4 years based on the numbers that have been told us, from a projection standpoint?
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so there's this perception that there's not enough female-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses to meet the demand. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that, and the only reason I say that is that you have a capacity today, and businesses are in business because they are serving some level of demand that's out there. Mm-hmm. We're looking at a doubling of that, significantly faster than the economy is growing for most other organizations. So the question is, because a lot of these businesses are smaller, do they have the capacity to grow at that kind of rate? At the same time, what we're going to see is not only a growing within the areas that typically we find diverse suppliers participating, but organizations are going to find new areas and say, this is an area that we haven't necessarily had a lot of diverse suppliers, supplying to us. Is it an opportunity? So there's going to be opportunities for organizations to build, I like to say, adjacent capabilities. So you could be a supplier to a particular company, and I'm probably going a little bit further on this, but there's a lot of I'll say supplier development dollars coming into this as well. And what that means is that organizations, I think it's 83% of the organizations either have dollars allocated today to develop diverse suppliers or are in the process of allocating those dollars over the next year.
Okay,
that's the amount of money that's coming in to develop. And a lot of times the develop is to help them develop not only their existing businesses, but potentially adjacencies that, you're not making this today, but this is sort of similar. Can you build this capability? We will help you in actually doing that.
That's amazing. Okay, so how do we get access to that? The women on this call, the women watching this video, how do we find out about that and get access to that?
Well, I think, part of it is just, I like to say is that, there are ways to, make yourself visible in the marketplace. And, one of the things that, people say, well, how do I get out there? And, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of growing in terms of the databases that are out there. So in the past, it was more around, word of mouth. I would say that, and that still works. I mean, when we ask organizations, where, how do you find your diverse suppliers for your business? The number one cited area was, through, peers and things like that. So what that tells you is that good work, if you perform well, just like any other supplier, that reputation gets, proceeded out and you get recommendations and, from the companies that you're working with. So, my perspective is you have to perform well, because from that, a lot of organizations, there's a lot of networking going on today because companies, you saw the growth numbers, are saying, where do we find these suppliers? And nobody wants to make a mistake. People want, regardless of diverse or not, they want top performing suppliers. So they're going to want to get some, so word of mouth is one of those ways. The other thing is these databases. So there's, one of the challenges is that you have a lot of organizations out there that, provide information. I mentioned, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, there's WeBank, there's a number of different organizations. I mean, there's a laundry list, lots of different organizations that, these companies go to find out, who are some of the, diverse suppliers out there. So, I always tell folks, I mean, that is a way to, make yourself visible on those lists as well. But I think the more efficient way that's developing now is some of these databases. So you have organizations out there creating tools that allow you to very quickly not have to go to 18 different agencies to find out, who are your different diverse suppliers, but have a database. And these databases have, web crawling, machine learning, artificial intelligence technologies built into them, where they're crawling the web looking for diverse suppliers, those with certificates or those that, whatever, even pull performance information, recommendation, all this type of information. So this information is going to be much more visible out there for the buyers to make decisions around. That's really just getting on board today, and you're going to see more of that going forward. So, make sure you're in those databases, make sure your information is accurate, because a lot of times you have the ability to, go in there and make some, changes, but perform well, because that information is there's going to be much more transparency on a go forward basis.
Perfect. And that's a good lead in. Also, we're going to have the CEO of Tealbook on next Friday. Yeah, she's one of those people. Purse Power's got a database, but it's only women-owned business, women-owned, women-led business. Pardon me. And I know that Stephanie has got all different kinds with all of the certification.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that referral. So she's going to be on next week. All right. Excellent. Let's see here. So anything else about when you say network, when you say get in front of them, are there specific places that you think we should be, or we should show up, or we should participate, or we can get this visibility you're talking about?
I think, there's trade shows, there's all kinds of different events. And obviously we've been in a virtual environment, when that changes. I believe going forward that we're going to see much more focus and, I'll say intent focus on participating in some of these events because of the wave of focus in this particular area. And so I think we, businesses need to be, that are diverse and women owned, need to be, much more willing to get out into some of these areas, because the companies are looking for, suppliers today and making yourself more visible. So where those, events are, the databases, the, making sure you're visible in the marketplace. But again, like I said, it's about word of mouth. So, participation is going to be important, whether it's virtual or whether it's in-person kinds of events.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this isn't one of the questions that I gave you, but I'm sure you're going to be able to respond to it. So with the pandemic, it seems like supply chains were broken all over the world. And have we gotten more nationalistic in terms of how people are looking at their supply chains? And do you think that they're going to be pulling some of their requirements back to the United States that they had in other countries? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, you are seeing some of that, right? I mean, you see President Biden, highlighting, some of these areas that are what we would call, national, I'll call them national assets, where you would have security concerns. Pharmaceuticals, for example. I mean, we saw our supply chains and, found out that a lot of things were being manufactured overseas. And what does that mean? And we also saw that, our supply chains in many cases, we were very heavily dependent on certain geographies, China being one of those. And so what we're seeing, and we started seeing coming out of the pandemic of last year, was a focus on more, I'll say, geographical diversification in our supply chains. We exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. And, again, I don't know if we would have saw that without a pandemic, meaning it was global, and that it was shutting down regions of the world, geographies around the world. And, I had clients that are, in Mexico, and, they had, a lot of the things that you think about in procurement say, hey, we got multiple manufacturing sites, so we don't have a single point of failure. We have multiple, but in one case, they have these manufacturing sites were in Mexico, and that's fine. But when the entire country shuts down, they could not deliver product or produce product, for a month. Well, that had a big impact on their revenue. So you are seeing more geographical diversification. You don't just see them exiting, China. I think, people are saying, do we have too much dependency? And that was really, there's other dependencies that we have around the world, but that was one of them. But your question about, do we see things coming back more domestically? The answer is yes. There are some capabilities that we're looking into as a country and building here, and not just being dependent on other areas. Around. And, one of the things that, absolutely makes that possible is more automation in terms of the way that we make things. The reason that we, push things into some of these geographies was because the labor component of actually making them was significant. It could have been 60% of the cost. And as a result of that, the only way to reduce, your product cost is to reduce that labor cost. Well, if that becomes more automated, then the location of that manufacturing capability, that production capability, becomes less dependent on the cost of it. And more important is, can I place it closer to the markets that we're in? Velocity is really the key right now. How fast can I get things done? How fast can I make, have that agility to make changes as a result of, changes in market tastes, et cetera. And so people are really looking at and better balancing not only the cost of their supply chain, but the agility that's within that supply chain.
No, that makes perfect sense. I know a few years ago, I used to work in the computer industry, and they were talking about the plastic printers. I'm not calling them the right thing, but they can make things out of plastic and you can print. And there was the idea that people would be able to print what they wanted.
Print on demand.
There we go. Is that impacting anything?
Well, I think you're talking about more like the 3D printing, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And so there's, manufacturing capacity. So, and they've been around, people are using that. And, but what it does open up is, again, manufacturing where you want manufacturing, meaning that, examples of, having a 3D printer at my house and deciding that, I have it here. And when I want product, I just hit a button, I make it. And all I got to do is probably buy the raw materials from the company. And then it makes it at my house and I could do that. That's an extreme where you go to. But, I know one organization, I don't know whatever happened about it, was in cosmetics. So there was a woman who was developing a cosmetics business that was basically 3D printing the cosmetics, and the idea was that people would buy these 3D printers and have them in their house and say, all right, today I want ABC, type of cosmetic, and tomorrow it's this, and, it would formulate it, print it, and done. So, there's a lot of that. And so, yes, that is certainly a trend and along with many others. So.
Wow. We'll talk about velocity and getting really close to the consumer, right? In their house, if you're able to do it.
Well, it's the velocity, it's the speed, it's getting closer to the customer. So everything's focused on the customer today. And you think about the digital transformation that we're going through organizations. One of the big tenets of digital transformation is customer centricity, that we're designing from the outside in. And so you see that in terms of how we do this. So, supply chains, we're seeing more and more supply chains being designed, where you're bringing together not only the production and the supply, together with the sales and marketing organization. So everything is in one organization, all focused on that end customer and delighting them.
That's a really interesting concept. How are those networks and those chains being built?
Well, it's obviously some organizational, but I think that the key is to break down the informational, I'll say, flow barriers between supply and demand, right? A lot of times, we're either building up too much inventory, et cetera, but a lot of that connection is being done through technology.
Absolutely.
Just bringing that visibility all the way on through, through the entire supply chain.
Wow. All right, guys, I want you to start coming up with your questions, please. Go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. So we've got people that are business leaders within inside companies, in addition to being business owners. What is the case that they can make for increasing supplier diversity inside their organizations?
Well, I think that, one of the biggest things today, and, it goes back to what I was saying, in terms of the amount of momentum around, the social, the social aspects of what companies make and how they act. I'll just use the term corporate social responsibility. So, what you're seeing is an environment, and I'll use an analogy here. So, we've, as consumers, have demanded from, organizations much more transparency in terms of how things are made. So in the food supply chain, right? Tell me what's in my food, and then tell me where it was originated. Where was it actually produced? I want to know and be, comfortable that it's actually organic, because you're calling it organic. How do you know, right? And so you're seeing that, and this is where the blockchain and all that kind of stuff comes in there, where, we as consumers want more transparency in terms of, the products that we're buying. I think the other thing, the analogy here, is that we want more transparency into companies. So, what is, I'm buying from ABC company. How do I really know what your social agenda is? What are you actually doing? And so we're seeing that in companies. I mean, you're seeing that in the terms of diversification within companies, saying, we want to see what your board makeup is. We want to see what your executive committee makeup is. I think what you're going to see is more transparency around, I want to know what you're saying, that you're making commitments in terms of diversifying your supply base. Let me see that. So I think you're going to see an environment where there's much more transparency around a lot of this. And I think the databases and everything I think we're headed in that direction. So it's not going to be just say that I can do this, and there's going to be much more transparency. And we as consumers are going to expect more transparency, not just, the other companies we're selling to, but we as consumers are going to say, I want to support socially responsible, and however you define that as an individual, types of companies. I need transparency into that. And I think that's where we're headed with some of this.
And that's what Power is all about. Absolutely. Is we want to support the companies that support them. Okay. All right. Let's see here. So the other thing that came to mind when you were talking was the employees. I mean, in terms of employees being attracted to these companies that have diverse supply chain. Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's one of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace today, and with a lot of professionals, is you're seeing an environment that, we're going more into a war on talent again, meaning that talent, there's more demand for it than there is supply for good talent. And so, we as companies, our success is built on not just technology and all the other things that we go do, it's the people that we have. And so if we're going to compete effectively in a marketplace that's becoming more and more competitive, though that talent is becoming much more, deliberate in terms of how they make their decisions, and the social responsibility of the companies they work for is growing in their decisioning process. And so, this is where it impacts the talent. And, as companies, not only do you want to do this type of stuff, but at the same time, you don't want to keep it a secret, right? So I'm doing that because it can be a way to attract talent, and more talent today is looking at these types of dimensions and aspects of companies and qualities of companies in making their decision in terms of where they want to work. You see that in some of the industries, the carbon-based industries, they've had some, challenges, with some of the talent. There was a time where, the carbon-based businesses out there had no problem because they were paying very well. They're one of the highest paying industries out there. But, as things changed, and talent, started using other criteria for making their decisions, beyond just the dollars, it's causing some challenges for some of these organizations. So, highlighting and doing those types of things is becoming a big impact in terms of the quality of the talent that you get, not only to attract, but to retain within your organization.
Absolutely, especially the young people. I've got triplet 21-year-olds, and I know that this is a factor for the young people coming to your organization or not.
Yeah.
Also, guys, please add questions either to the chat or the Q&A box. But the other thing is investors, I think, are really looking at this too. How do they find the great companies to invest in that are committed to things like this, like diverse supply chains? Any idea?
Yeah, I don't have all the data there, but I know that there are, I'll just say, socially responsible indexes out there that companies do. I think it was the Blackstone Group. I could be totally wrong on that, or BlackRock. That keeps a list of companies. It's more around sustainability, and sustainability does look at ethical types of challenges around the world in terms of forced labor, et cetera. So they were keeping these indexes on these companies, and those that were doing better and more socially conscious than others, because not only are we as consumers, making decisions in terms of, I might be willing to pay a little bit, more, because of the type of company and the kind of responsibility they're taking in terms of the world. But we as investors, where do we want to invest in those companies? So the only way we can do that is we have transparency. And that goes back to my, comment before, is that we have to know what's going on inside these companies. And so, as investors, as consumers, we're demanding more and more of this. And so I think we're just at the start of it. You're going to see more and more of this and much more transparency going forward.
Which is all good. That can only be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of, guys, please add your questions if you have any. In the interim, can you talk any more about your study that you did and any kind of key points that we've missed in our questions that might be useful for people to know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we looked at. I mean, there's things, just in understanding in terms of, what's driving, some of this, focus on, diversification. And, really, one of the questions we asked about is the alignment between what's happening internally with the organization and what's happening externally in terms of suppliers from a diversification standpoint. And, more and more, one of the big drivers here is just the alignment between, that, what we're doing internally with our companies and really just including that more broadly. It's interesting because, when you think about in these companies, many of them have grown up with, supply-based diversity managers. Now, prior to the events of last year and what we're seeing today, in some cases that was a part-time job. I'm a category manager and I'm focusing on buying in a particular area. And oh, by the way, I spend some side time, trying to build, a more diverse supply base. And, but what you're seeing now is, not only more investment. So what we saw in our study was an increase in the amount of dollars that are being allocated to these programs. So that's not just, the people. So we're seeing an increase in the number of individuals that are being dedicated to focus on this area. We're also seeing more budget. And that budget is to, for them to attend fairs, some of the things like, how do you get recognized? Well, how you get recognized is you want to get in front of these individuals that are in these companies. I mean, they're your conduit in terms of finding all of this. And their job is to, build a program, create the energy internally, get the executives involved, get the executives to attend these types of events, to get more exposure of the company in front of, the diverse, suppliers that are out there, get all the category managers aware of what's happening, et cetera. And so there's more dollars going into it, more people going into it. We even, at the Hackett Group, one of the individuals that are, on our team, is actually made a decision to go to a company, and the role that he's going into is a role to focus on risk and supply-based diversification. So, it's interesting. These roles are growing. I think the other thing that's interesting is that it's not just because you always had that supply-based diversity, kind of, manager within an organization. It's now we're seeing more of a broadening. In some cases, it's a social responsibility or corporate social responsibility role. So they're combining sustainability efforts as well as diversity efforts into a single role. And so we're seeing that. We're also seeing in some cases where the role is being taken out of procurement and just be made part of an overall diversity, corporate social responsibility, organization within the company. And so, in most cases, in most of the cases, you see the supply-based diversity or corporate social responsibility, director, manager, whatever that title is, reporting up through the chief procurement officer. What we're now seeing in some cases, not prevalent, where that's been pulled out and made part of a broader, responsibility organization, and, really bringing much more integration between what we're doing in our supply markets to what we're doing internally to our companies. So
that's good.
Yeah. And so that's one of the things. I mean, the other things that we asked about was just, things like metrics. You got to understand, I mean, companies measure performance. And so, one of the things we asked about was, what are the measures that you're using to highlight the performance of your supplier diversity program? And not surprising, it's the percentage of spend that is diverse. The metrics that the numbers I was providing to you earlier, that, what percentage of our supply base, of our spend, is with diverse suppliers.
Mhm.
And so that's by far and above the most heavily tracked measure for these programs. But what was also interesting, and again, this was done in the first quarter of this year, going into the second quarter, there was about a quarter of the organizations that highlighted that they didn't have any way of measuring, or they didn't measure the performance of the supply-based diversity program. But what we are seeing is more broadening to say, what are ways that we can measure the impact that we have on local communities? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm a company and I have, large presence in multiple communities, what are we doing in our local communities? And from a diversity standpoint, rather than, participating, what can we do in the local community, in the diverse, suppliers or suppliers that are there? And so they're trying to measure these types of things to look at local community kind of impact. And, so you're seeing some of those things type of change. I mean, organizations are looking at brand and what is this doing to our brand in the marketplace? Because corporate social responsibility, as we've been talking, has an impact on your reputation, your corporate reputation, and your brand.
Absolutely.
So how do we enhance that in the populations, the communities that we participate in? So those are some of the other ways that people are looking at measuring as well.
That's excellent. I mean, it's a really good time to be in your field and doing what we're doing, because there's a lot of visibility to it. People care about it. Yes. And especially your point at the very beginning where you're saying the senior executive team now is getting involved and saying that this is important to us. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. You can't always drive these things from the middle of a company.
No. And I think that's if somebody was asking me, what's the biggest change that's occurred, is the awareness and the focus of the executive teams and the boards of these companies. So companies that, this was something that they thought about, not that they didn't do, focus on, diversifying their supply base, but now it's an initiative. It's not just, oh, by the way, it's happening because we just happen to, do business with diverse suppliers and let me just report on it. They're now taking a proactive role in terms of driving it. And so I think, what you're seeing is much more proactiveness in this space than what we have seen in the past.
And that is fantastic. I mean, I grew up in human resources, and a lot of companies check the box around diversity related initiatives. And I think that's what it's been for years. So I'm thankful that it's now becoming a business issue, which is really where you need the emphasis to be. Right.
Yeah. And I think, as we've been saying, it is a business issue, and it's an issue that organizations are looking at, and it will only grow. What will be interesting, and one of the aspects of our study was to really look at, not only what's happening within the U.S., but get a perspective in terms of how things are, sort of progressing in other parts of the world. And one is, how, as you go to different regions of the world, the definition of diversity is going to be different, depending on what part of the world. Now, most commonly is we asked these organizations, if you went across the entire world, what's the most common, diverse group that's part of your definition of diversity? And it was women-owned businesses, which makes sense. But, if we go down to Australia, what you'll see is a high percentage of organizations in their definition of diversity is with the Aboriginal population. So, in business in that area, but you're not going to see that in other parts of the world. So, you will see it, change, the definitions. So anyway, we wanted to get, not only what's happening within the four walls of the U.S. and really Western Europe, but also, what we see more happening on a global basis as well.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I'm not getting a lot of questions. I've got Suzanne Webb. She owns a surgical network called Exclusive Surgery Solutions, and they have every race in their medical providers. They also treat patients of every race and gender. Let's see here. What is the best way to get designated as a diverse woman-owned business and our products designated the same, checking all the boxes?
Yeah. Well, and there are, organizations out there, as you and I have talked before, whether it be eBank or, there's different businesses, your organization, in terms of, bringing that visibility. So, I think what's interesting today is, one of the questions that we asked in our survey is, as you look at the population of diverse suppliers that you have today, and I have to, I'm looking at my notes here because I can't always remember the percentages, but, 43% of the population highlighted that as they look at their diverse suppliers, that they require certification. That leaves 57% that don't require any kind of certification. So, if you say that you're a women-owned business or you're a Black-owned business, et cetera, they take the word for it. We do believe going forward, we're going to see higher degrees of certification or some kind of way to designate that you are in that. And the reason is because of everything we've been talking about. This is becoming much more visible in our companies. Our boards, our executive committees, and our companies don't want to be caught off guard to say, we're doing all this work with diverse suppliers. You could imagine a CEO making that comment and then finding out somebody says, well, you're doing work with this business and they're diverse, but they're really not diverse. And, that would not be good. So I think you're going to expect, much more due diligence in terms of the businesses and are they, whether it's certified or some other way that they, that we are comfortable and confident that who we're doing business with is what they say they are.
Absolutely.
But the other part of the question is, how do I go about doing it? And, there's processes. I mean, if you decide to, go out to some of these different organizations, they have processes that you go through, and typically it costs money. And that's been a bit of a barrier for some organizations. I've had small suppliers, a lot of the diverse suppliers can be, smaller, make comments that, we haven't done that because, not only the level of effort that it takes, but it also is an expense to keep this up. And they're small. They said, hey, we're doing enough business already. We're very happy and we got companies working with us. But, I do believe that that's going to change, that these companies are going to now require more and more as we look forward, some level of certification. So I think there's going to have to be something done there, especially for the really small suppliers.
Yeah.
That companies may have to, pay to help them get certified, or maybe there'll be a new body that comes in. It's less cost. And, again, I think it's going to get disrupted a bit. I think the current model of
it needs to be. The people that have gone through the process, that have gone to get certified, they get the partnerships with the larger businesses, but there's a ton of hoops. And I've had plenty of women say it doesn't bring them any benefit. But to your point, I know. So Stephanie is going to be on next week, and she has also got a way to do some self-certification. I know that the government had self-certification. I think that we as PursePower need to be looking at this as well. But your point is really well taken.
Yeah. Okay. I think those are some of those opportunities. I think, the biggest thing, and you and I were, we chatted yesterday, and I mean, I think it's just trying to remove these barriers. And so, if we're going to create all these barriers, I mean, we want to see more diversification, but we put up barriers that, hey, you got to spend all this money, you got to go through these processes to be certified, et cetera. We got to remove some of these barriers so that it can happen. The other barrier is just our companies themselves. And I think the comment that I made, you just look like, some of these industries, especially ones that are more regulated, banks, for example, it's difficult to become a supplier to these companies. And you're a small supplier and say, wow, I got to go through all of this. I mean, it's you don't want to, tie up half your company, trying to just to get approved as a supplier and go through all the risk qualifications and risk assessments that they go through. It's almost mind numbing, the kind of, that you have to go through. So a lot of these bigger companies are starting to think of ways that they can say they understand this is a barrier. So what can we do to help these companies, these smaller ones that don't have those resources, to help them through the processes that we have to become a supplier to our company? So.
Well, and if you think about who's spending money right now, it is the government, big time. And from what I understand, the small business set aside, or the woman-owned set aside, is not being fully utilized. So it's only 5%, and yet it's still not being utilized because of these barriers that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we are coming up on the end of time here. Any other questions, guys? And I'll go ahead and do our closing questions. So please ask more if you've got them in the chat or the Q&A. All right. So at the end of the day, what would you like us to have learned from you today?
I mean, I guess, as I think about, the participants, in this session, they're selling to these companies. And, hopefully what I did is create some more awareness in terms of what's happening on the customer side, potentially some of the customers that you're, either supplying today or potentially will, as to the changes that are occurring in that environment.
Okay. Okay. And are there any actions you recommend we take right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a number of different, actions that you could take. And, one of the things is, we talked about databases and things like that, understanding that more and more of this will become more prevalent. And you mentioned having Stephanie on next week from Book. Get in those databases, make sure your information is accurate, et cetera. That's one thing. I mean, what you want to do is just make sure your information, because you want to create awareness in the marketplace. I think, one of the things that we talked about earlier is just the work that you're doing. I do believe there's going to be more transparency around supplier performance. We've been working on that just in general, regardless of diverse or non-diverse. How can we get more transparency in this? And, I think, companies want that, more transparency in terms of performance. So perform well, because I do believe the future is there's going to be more transparency as companies are going to want to know, who should I go do business with? And so we want to make sure if these databases start holding that kind of information. I think, getting references, as you sit there and say, hey, I want to expand, I know all these companies are doing this. Make sure you have a good buttoned up set of references, have companies put them on your site, whatever. That's always important. I mean, these are, sort of, marketing 101 types of things, but they work regardless of the environment and whether it's diverse or not. These are the kinds of things that companies look for. But the other thing I mentioned was just the increase in diverse, I'll say the dollars that are going into supplier development. I made the comment that, 83% of organizations are either doing it today, investing in supplier development, or, going to be doing it in a very short amount of time. That's pretty much, the majority of, almost all of them that are going to be doing it. And probably that gap will close even further going forward. And so as you look at that, that's a huge opportunity. Yeah. So if you're working with companies that are customers of you, ask them, are you doing things and are there supplier development dollars available? Especially if you're a good supplier, you have earned the right to ask them these types of things. What can we do to work together to do other things? Even if it's outside of your thing, are there ways you could help me develop in these areas? And I could help you in other areas. There's more desire to do that today than there ever has been.
That's good. The other thing that's occurring to me is women who are in these positions or in these conversations need to bring in other women suppliers too.
Yeah,
they've got the opportunity to share the wealth with their colleagues who might be doing something different than they are.
Right.
Looking for suppliers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, okay. It looks like we are coming up on time. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share that I haven't asked you about?
I don't have, I mean, we touched on a lot of different types of things. And I guess, maybe a parting comment I would make is, I'll just say it, ride the wave. There's a lot of momentum in this space right now. Take advantage of it. I don't see there's ever been a period of time like we are in today. Take advantage of it. And like I said, ride the wave.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. You've been tremendous. I appreciate it. I want to remind everybody next week, again, we do have Stephanie Lapierre. She's the CEO of Teal Book, and I hope you make it because I think this is an important, second conversation. So you kind of teed it up for Stephanie, and Stephanie's got a lot of resources to help people get in front of these major companies. Let's see here, on the July 30th, we're going to do our networking event that we do every month. And then, guys, I think we're going to take August as a hiatus and a break, and then we'll come back in the fall. So I want everybody to know we've got services on our website now, digital marketing services you can get at. One of them is around reputation management, as a matter of fact. And they're saying that that's a huge part of the customer journey these days. People will look you up online and then they're going to look for reviews and then they'll decide to do business with you. So that, to your point, the recommendations or reviews are super critical. Let's see here. So we're looking for sponsors for this program if you have an interest in the fall. And go to our website, download the Google Chrome extension, and as you shop online, it will put a PursePower logo next to the women-owned, women-led businesses in our directory so that you can find them as you shop. I hope you will like and share our social media pages. Please let people know that we do these broadcasts every Friday at 10, and we're going to probably replay some of our prior broadcasts. If you ever want to look for those, they're at pursepower.com under the Let's Share the Journey tab. Okay, any final comments from you?
No, all good. All good. I enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. My apologies to everybody on the technology. Have no idea. My system just went down, so I'm now using my phone's internet. Okay, thank you again. And everybody, please remember, PursePower, we have it. Let's use it. Have a great week. See you next Friday.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.